So this is the third part of the chapter 7 and 8 video lecture. And again, this is on interpersonal communication and interpersonal relationships. So we've talked about different kinds of relationships, and we've talked about some approaches to managing relationships and especially managing disclosure and personal information. So now we're going to talk a little bit about communication styles. So we all come into relationships with certain desires and expectations, and we even come with some communication styles as well. And how we communicate these depends on our individual communication style. Communication style can affect the communication climate. So different co-cultures and cultures prioritize different communication styles, and differences in communication styles can create conflict in relationships. The idea of someone being passive-aggressive, like you've probably seen, well, I don't know if it still exists. There used to be a site called Passive-Aggressive Post-it Notes that was amazing because it was these hilarious Post-it notes that people would leave about problems, but were like, oh, it's okay, but it obviously wasn't. And so passive-aggressive is one of the communication styles that can cause problems in relationships, especially if you have differences in those communication styles. So there are 4 basic types of communication. So a passive communication style is submitting to other people's demands and conceding your own needs in favor of theirs. The aggressive communication style, probably would be better titled the abusive one, is attacking another person's self-concept and expressing hostility expressly to cause pain. So aggressive person might call someone lazy or worthless or all sorts of other names like that. Passive-aggressive is indirectly expressing hostility. So it's often when things have really built up, when someone has been passive for a while and they're not yet at aggressive. They don't want to get too aggressive, but they'll say something in a way, like their words will indicate that it's fine, but their actions say otherwise. And you can imagine how there could be problems in a relationship, say, between a person who's passive and a person who's aggressive, or how passive aggressiveness could lead to mixed signals in a relationship. The one we actually really want to shoot for is assertive. So assertive communication styles use messages that describe personal needs, rights, desires, and expectations honestly while still demonstrating respect for both yourself and your partner. It's also the hardest to achieve, and it requires more vulnerability than the other ones. So let's talk also a little bit about dialectics and managing conflicts. Dialectics is in chapter 7, managing conflicts is in chapter 8, but dialectics is literally about managing conflicts. So I wanted to put these together. So what is dialectics? It's tension between conflicting forces. And relational dialectics is dialectics in a relationship. It's competing psychological tensions that exist in relationships. So some types of relational dialectics include autonomy versus connection. So autonomy is the desire to do things independently, and connection is the desire to link your actions and your decisions with your partner. And you can see how that might cause some tension. So let's say that, a girl and a guy have been dating for a couple of years, and one of them is really ready to move in together, and the other is not quite ready to take that step. Well, that difference in desire and autonomy versus connection is going to potentially cause some tension, some dialectics. Similarly, openness versus closeness. Openness is the desire to share intimate ideas and feelings, and closeness is the desire to keep them to yourself. And trying to navigate when to be open and when not to can cause internal conflict, and certainly can cause conflict in a relationship. Novelty versus predictability. So novelty is the desire for originality, freshness, uniqueness in relationship of the behavior or the partners. I've mixed up some words there. But, it's that sense of newness, that sense of excitement. And predictability is the desire for consistency, reliability, and dependability. In romantic relationships, one of the things that often causes them to kind of fade over time is getting in the habit of predictability and comfort and losing that sense of novelty. So I kept thinking of this song, and I can't get it to play in a way that you'll be able to hear it as well. But this is Rupert Holmes' Escape, the Pina Colada song, and I feel like it's a good illustration of dialectical tensions, or relational dialectics. So you can pause and play this for a minute. You can go and look at it online. I had hoped that I would be able to play it for you, but it's not going to record the computer's audio on the service that I'm using, so you wouldn't be able to hear it if I played it. But just go ahead and look up Rupert Holmes' Escape, the Pina Colada song, and pause this while you do. Here are the lyrics to Escape. You've probably heard them before, but it starts, "I was tired of my old lady, we've been together too long, like a worn out recording of our favorite song. So while she lay there sleeping, I read the paper in bed. In the personal columns, there was this letter I read." And so he reads this letter from this girl who sounds amazing, right? And you can see here the comfort versus the predictability versus novelty. They've kind of been, they've gotten to a routine. You can see that tension right there, and he's looking for novelty. And so he didn't think about his lady. It sounds kind of mean, but they'd fallen into the same old dull routine. Again, that predictability versus novelty. So then he writes her in response, says that they're gonna go meet at a place called O'Malley's, and they're gonna plan their escape. And so he goes to the bar, waits with high hopes, and he sees the girl, and it's his wife that he's been with for all these years. And they laugh and go, "I never knew." And all these things in the letter that they had both been hoping for that they had not been getting from each other. And so there we see kind of the tension between closeness and openness. They both had these desires that they didn't express, so closeness had won out. And so then it refreshes the relationship, which is an odd ending to the song since they were both willing to cheat. But I felt like it's a pretty good illustration. And yes, I didn't illustrate it as much, but the desire for autonomy had been prioritized over the desire for connection. You know, one of them's asleep, the other is, looking at the paper in bed. And so you can see all of these tensions present in this song. So how do we manage dialectal tensions? So one option is temporal selection. Temporal means pertaining to time. So choosing one desire while ignoring another for the time being, and then coming back to that other one later. Another strategy is called topical segmentation, which is just basically choosing certain topics to satisfy our desire and the other's desire. So let's focus on this now. Neutralization is compromising between the desires of the individuals. So it's, compromise. Neither wins, but neither's unhappy either. And reframing is changing your perception about the opposing desires to make them more palatable. So it's looking at things from a different perspective. Interpersonal conflict is an expressed struggle between two interdependent people who perceive a conflict to be insurmountable. And so that's a pretty heavy definition. Interdependent here means reliant on each other. Expressed means that both people are aware of the conflict. And insurmountable means that it's something that neither person thinks can be overcome. So examples might be incompatible goals, scarce resources, or communication interference, as we've talked about before. So conflict management approaches can either be assertive or unassertive, and at the same time, they can be cooperative or uncooperative. They can also be assessed by the degrees to which each person wins or loses. So you can have management approaches that are lose-lose, win-lose, lose-win, or win-win. So we'll talk about some of these conflict management approaches. So one of them is avoiding. Avoiding is psychologically removing yourself from the conflict. It's lose-lose because you're not actually addressing the problem. So the other person doesn't really know about it, so they can't solve it. And nothing changes for you. And it's both uncooperative and unassertive. Accommodating is kind of the opposite. It's satisfying the needs or accepting the opinions of others while neglecting your own thoughts and needs. So it would be lose-win. You lose, the other person wins. It is definitely cooperative, but it's not very assertive, so we'd say it's unassertive. Competing is satisfying our own needs with little or no concern for the others in the relationship. So that would be win-lose, right? It'd be the opposite of accommodating. So we win, but our partner loses. And it is assertive and uncooperative. So again, opposite of accommodating. So in the last two, we have compromising. So compromising you think would be the best one, right? You know, if you find a middle ground. It's actually not. So each partner gives up part of what they want to satisfy the other, and neither partner gets everything they want. So it's kind of a partial lose-lose. It's a partial win-win, but, you know, not the best one. It would be moderately cooperative and assertive. And then finally, you have collaboration, where you work together through the problem to discover a mutually acceptable solution that both people can stand behind and feel good about. And so that's the only one that's really win-win. It is both cooperative and assertive. So some guidelines for collaboration: you want to identify the problem and own it as your own. Describe the problem in terms of behavior, consequences, and feelings. Refrain from blaming or accusing. Try to find common ground. It can be helpful to kind of mentally rehearse what you have to say if you have some time ahead of time. You're not always going to, and obviously if you're in the middle of a discussion, you want to be actively listening, not rehearsing your next response. So that one really depends on the situation. Disengage emotionally to prevent a defensive response. Again, that depends on the situation as well. If it's something that's very personal, it can be helpful to disengage and kind of try to be objective. But you still want to have enough feeling to be able to empathize with the other person as well. You do want to respond with genuine concern. It's always a good idea to paraphrase and ask questions, as well as to ask about alternative solutions. Like, have you thought about or have you considered? Things like that. So we will briefly talk about the role of technology in interpersonal communication and relationships, because it does play a role, but this shouldn't take more than a minute or two. So technology is now a very crucial part of relationships, and one characteristic of relationships online is the idea of hyperpersonal communication. What this means is the tendency we have to kind of create an identity online and only portray the positive things about ourselves rather than portraying us as whole human beings. So what we tend to do is we tend to fill in the blanks about a person online and assume they're like us. They have the same strengths, weaknesses, because they're not. Our brain isn't fully processing them as a real person. And so that can definitely be a danger. Another danger is not realizing that other people are also engaging in hyperpersonal communication and only putting their best foot forward. So, you know, you can look at all these people on Facebook with all these perfect lives and think, oh God, what am I doing wrong? Well, in reality, they have as many faults in their lives, you just don't see them. So another characteristic of technology or communication with technology is media multiplexity, which means using different media platforms to communicate. And in general, stronger relationships tend to use more media platforms. So you might talk on Skype, you might talk via Facebook, you might email back and forth and text message. All of those would be different types of media, and the engaging in multiple types of media is media multiplexity. So that's the end of this lecture and the 7 and 8 lecture. Make sure you look at the very long series of lecture for chapter 17. It is definitely information that is worth looking at. It's just an extraordinarily dense chapter, so it took a little while to kind of break it all down. Have a great day, and I'll see you guys soon.